Bonjour, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci d'avoir accepté l'invitation d'EnerGaïa pour cette nouvelle table ronde, une matinée même dédiée à l'éolien flottant. Deux tables rondes vont se succéder. Un rendez-vous réalisé en partenariat avec la région Occitanie et l'agence ADOC. Avant de démarrer et pour ouvrir nos échanges, j'invite tout de suite à me rejoindre sur scène Didier Codorniou. Merci d'être avec nous, vice-président de la
Vice
région
President of the Occitania region and President of the Parliament of the Sea. Please come up on stage. You have the floor. Good morning to all of you. Can you all hear me? Yes? I apologize, I don't have my headsets. I would like to begin by thanking you all for having come this morning for the 10th years in a row on this EnerGaïa fair. And of course, I would like to apologize the absence of Caro Dalia, the president. I know she was here yesterday for the inauguration of the fair. I would like to take a few minutes and talk to you about strategy, regional strategy. This year, 2025, was for our region a big year with the two pilot farms that are now installed offshore from Grisons and Port-Barcarès. You probably saw the structures, the big infrastructures, the gigantic infrastructures that we couldn't even imagine a few years ago, with these huge floaters and turbines, of course, that will completely change the economic model. I would like to tell you a few words about what we're expecting together on that. I would like to talk about the lack of visibility that we have in terms of the PPE. You know, this PPE is long to come. The calendar are being pushed back, overlapping. The decisions that are announced are followed by other decisions. And I know that last week there were some meetings that took place with the Prime Minister, who confirmed one assignment to Jean-Bernard Lévy, who's the President of the Council of Energy, former President of EDF, and Mr. Denis Thuot, who's a State Councillor from the Commission of Regulation of Energy, in order to optimize the public subsidies to renewable energies and to energy storage to make sure that we can keep our goals over time. We were supposed to hear back by the end of the year. We are at the end of the year, and I hope that we won't have to wait too long to get some good news, so the companies can imagine a bright future ahead of them and understand what they are to expect. We are in a learning stage. I think we have to accept it as such. It's a normal stage for such a young sector, such an ambitious sector. No other emerging industry has gone on a straight line. It's true as well for the heavy industries, and the floating offshore wind energy is only 10 years old, and I'm quite in a good position to tell you about it, because at the very beginning, 25 years ago, I had just been appointed mayor of Grisons, and there were some projects of wind turbines already that were being talked about, and we talked about them with the prefect at the time and the sous-prefect. I was, I was really excited about it, because I always thought that the wind turbines next to the shore were not strategic challenges for a coast, and for the landscape, it was a real issue, and in terms of environmental, for environmental reasons. So that's why we're here, and we can be satisfied, and we can look forward to the second stage, because this is going to be the industrialization stage, how we're going to be able to put in place this new sector. We have some great success to show for. 2 years ago, we had no floating wind turbines at sea. Now we have 3 pilot farms, wind farms, in the Mediterranean. And for us, us southern people, Mediterranean people, it's very important for us, wherever we are, and very often in Paris or elsewhere. The Mediterranean is always forgotten in major national strategies. So it's very important that I go back to our regional strategy. It's very important to have a harbor, and the harbor of Port-la-Nouvelle, if we were only to mention one, is one of the most advanced harbors in Europe to welcome these wind energy activities, and it works hand in hand with the great port of Marseille and the harbor of Sète and Frontignan to address the challenges of the planning 5.8 gigawatt that it's not going to be in the next 10 years, so over 300 wind turbines by 2050. This is a huge challenge from an industrial point of view, from a technological point of view, because the technologies are evolving, and also on the know-how, research, without forgetting our friends, the fishermen, who, because it's very important that we all work together, hand in hand. So the President Caro Delga likes to talk about working together. So this is a sector that invests a lot of money, companies who believe in the sector, who recruits people, who ramp up in skills. The Geomed project that mobilized a lot of people during the assembly phase on the harbor. We have finally an ecosystem, an economic structured ecosystem with Windock, which gathers over 220 companies that now know this industry of floating wind energy, and they're recognized, and they're also we're not absolutely perfect, of course, but that's where we need to find the right structures and the right industry. We have the right industries. I look at Monsieur Mathias, who's with us. Thank you for being with us, with other companies that are also here. It's a remarkable work that has been done so far with a very technical, with a lot of technical expertise. When I meet and I talk about the Academy of the Sea, we always mention those projects, and where you see all these young people who discover the jobs of the sea with their parents, they come back home and they're really motivated to work in this industry. So the challenges of wind energy and harbors that are going to grow are going to help the new generation to be part of this sector. We have a great economic network as well with the University of Montpellier, INSA Toulouse, Tarbes as well, just to mention a few. They're all involved, and they train the skills of tomorrow. We also have the project MECEN, which is the biggest training program dedicated to wind farms in France. And at the initiative of the Rectorat and the Academy of the Sea, I want to talk to you about this BMER. This is very important. So we want to share this project with the people who use the sea, the fisher, the Parliament of Sea, the Sea Park. We have fishermen who have got together to participate in the economic development of the sector, particularly with this structure that I will call a cooperative, the Mediterranean Fishermen Service, or FishWind, which is another research project to combine fishing and wind farms. And also, I want to be very clear with you, nothing will get done without the fishermen. And this is very important at this point, that we are aligned with them and that we have indicators, that we listen to them. So we need to have a contract for the sector. We signed one of the first contracts for the sector last year before the states triggered as well the same type of contracts. We have something huge as well that is great. We have this hope on floating wind farms that a lot of people don't have. So we have learned, we have acquired clairvoyance, know-how, visibility that we could not imagine a few years ago, 25 years ago. When we have the opportunity, like me, to be an elected official, and I've already done 4 mandates, We are capable to remember history and to remind others of history, and that the Mediterranean coast with Mediterranean, the Provence-Côte d'Azur would become really the great region for floating wind farms. Not everybody believed in us, and here we are yet. Floating wind farms is not just a trend, people think that it may cost too much, and of course, maybe there's things that can be pointed out, but what we're trying to do is to manufacture this at lower cost to make sure that the structures are economically sustainable. And it's not just a trend of the moment from our politicians. It's a real political will. It's a major lever for industrialization. And as long as we talk about reindustrialization, our region must be a region with the first wind farm hub in the Mediterranean coast. It is a sustainable, reliable energy that is completely important for the energy mix. We're completely aligned with the President of the Republic, and next to the hydro energy, solar panels. It's a fundamental brick of our energy sovereignty. And there is a very simple thing to mention. Europe today, which is go through difficult times like the rest of the world, and France cannot depend any longer on others for its energy. It's a question of independence. It's a challenge of security and stability, and that's where we need to think about the private partnership that we couldn't have done a few years ago, that we did ourselves with the CIMOP that you are doing as well, that we're doing together, because it is only together that we'll be able to move forward. The developers, the harbors, the local authorities, the region, Europe, it is not a territory like any other. It's a collective sector. It's a complete change of value, and the local element is fundamental. The value created by the sector is going to benefit our territory, our companies that are local here. I give you the first number. The first wind turbines that were at between 30 and 40 jobs in 2024. We were at 470 jobs created. And if I take the indicators that we have at the moment in the next 15 years, we should be at between 3,000 and 3,500 jobs just for the sector of wind farms. So I'd like to get back to the port of Port-la-Nouvelle harbor that is going to grow with hydrogen, with manufacturing, production of hydrogen, storage of hydrogen, and other challenges, such as Bar-Mar, where we're going to deal with a lot of things. The port that invests, the young people who get trained, who want to work in this industry here, it is really a very important political message. We have the ambition of a European sector that is anchored in France, anchored in the Mediterranean, and anchored in Occitania. So that's why I'm very pleased to see you all, to meet you, for some of you. The region and the local authorities count on you, because you are going to give us the right momentum. You went from training to industrialization, and this is thanks to you that we're going to change our ambition, and with a real service for the territory, for the environment, and let's be the European pillars of floating wind farms in Occitania. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Dini Codogno, Vice President of the region Occitania and President of the Parliament of the Sea. So to follow our first roundtable, industrializing floating wind farms. So why is this topic now? Because floating wind farms are arriving at a very precise moment. There's a pressure from Asia, particularly from China, that is getting bigger. How do we structure a new industrial sector? We know that Europe is depending on a number of industrial bricks. What can we organize a sovereignty on floating wind farms? To answer all these questions to remind you of all the challenges and ambitions. We have 3 speakers. We're going to talk with them about the different topics, current topics. And first of all, to talk about the challenges of securing the delivery and the production, we're happy to welcome the project of the floating wind farms. Benoît Chenu from EDF Power Solutions. How do you look at the situation of floating wind turbines? Another actor that is key when we talk about floating wind turbines. Let's welcome Dominique Monod from Ocean Winds. He's in charge of development. You're going to tell us exactly, concretely, is France and Europe can still build a competitive sector on floating wind farms, and how can we fight against the competition coming from China throughout the value chain? And then at the end of the roundtable, we'll talk about the ramping up stage. We're going to welcome the representative from the University of Montpellier, Petru Nottinger, who's the director of the Institute of Electronics and Systems from the university. We're going to talk to you about know-how, training programs. Thank you to all of you to be with us. Just a word for those of you who follow us. There's a new thing in this edition. You can react on live with the speakers. You have a QR code up on the screen that you can scan. You take a picture of this QR code, and you are connected to an app where you can ask your questions. I just invite you to put down your first name. It will be easier for me. Thank you all for sending me all your questions. It will make the debate more lively. And then at the end, we'll also take some questions live from the room. So I would like to give you the program of this roundtable. It's broken down in 3 parts. First of all, we're going to wonder about, is this floating wind farms, so we're not another test of truth in terms of sovereignty. Then we're going to talk about the value chain, technology, harbors, how we can make this sector concrete. And then we're going to look at the conditions for these projects to succeed. We're going to talk about PP as well, training and jobs. So I spoke way too much. We want to listen to Dominique Monod on this topic. There's a lot of pressure. The costs are increasing in this context. France and Europe, Dominique, can we really together hope to build a competitive industrial sector on floating windmills?
I hope you can all hear me. Thank you for the invitation. Hello, everybody. Very pleased to be here to talk about these very topical matters. Can we create a competitive industrial chain in Europe? I hope so. We have to draw inspiration from land-based wind farms. Wind farms, that's an idea that started in Europe in the 80s, and then floating wind farms, and it's developed in a spectacular manner over the last 10 years approximately. We have a large number of European manufacturers of wind turbines at sea. About 90% are made in Europe of these wind turbines. So we've succeeded in land-based wind farms. We have to succeed at sea as well. It's quite complicated, as mentioned, but we'll have to rise to the challenge. We've talked about China, which has invested heavily in the area and has caught up with us. China has a huge industrial capacity to make floating wind farms. Europe traditionally has been quite open, but is beginning to react and to protect itself a little bit. I think we can succeed. We shouldn't deny or reject everything done in China. It's no longer China with cheap labor and the world a manufacturing hub. They're good at innovation, automation. We can draw inspiration from them in many areas, and that will help us probably to lower our costs too. So I think we have all the wherewithal. The state needs to play its role in allocating projects, because that's what will get things going in terms of investment and the supply chain. So we now have to go into top speed. You spoke about Chinese competition. It's true. We have great ambitions. The Chinese industrial might and technology, which is progressing fast, is a huge obstacle, if you like. Well, it's not really an obstacle. We have partnerships which have been created between China and Europe. It's a win-win situation with all sorts of innovations and things being done in China, which we can draw inspiration from. In Europe, we've started to introduce regulations. We have the Critical Material Act, inter alia, for example. So I think that if we remain too open, Chinese industry will swamp us, but we shouldn't raise too many barriers. We have to continue our exchanges with China. With offshore wind farms, it gobbles up a lot of capital. It's very expensive. We're fortunate to have pilot projects in France in the Mediterranean. It's quite unique, and we're making the most of it. The Chinese will soon be on the market too. They have prototypes for floating offshore wind farms. We can draw inspiration from them and introduce partnerships in order to improve the industrial process and lower our costs, because if our costs remain too high, we won't be able to develop this line of activity as much as we hoped. A question: what's the percentage of Chinese components in European turbines? I'm sorry, I don't really know. It depends a bit on the turbine manufacturers. They have several different suppliers in Europe and outside Europe. They have quite a wide-ranging chain. The only component we really depend on is the magnets. There, China has a very powerful position, and we have to reduce this dependence. Europe has started to do so, but then the percentage of parts, there are about 3,000 parts, and I don't know what the Chinese percentage is. Do you have a little video or something? No. I'd like to take the floor. I don't want to say anything silly, but European turbine manufacturers have more structural dependencies on components and raw materials, which play a major part. But they're probably capable of inshoring some of the manufacturing to Europe. Okay, you don't have a precise answer, but it reflects a reality. Of course, on the one hand, we want to develop all this energy. We want to create industrial sovereignty. How do you view this dilemma? Well, to remain sovereign, we need to stop using fossil fuels. We need to reinforce our industrial chain and reduce our dependency. It's very important to map the European industrial chain in order to identify the weaknesses and offset them. We need to work in particular on raw materials, the manufacturing capacity, logistical weaknesses, and also highly technical components. An initial map was done by the European Commission as part of the work on the Net Zero Industry Act. There's a clear finding, namely the European Union is dependent in a certain number of segments, solar panels, wind farms too, where inevitably we do depend on these permanent magnets. Our collective goal must be to reconquer sovereignty in terms of energy, the ability to deliver projects at well-controlled costs and within a given deadline. We need to have an energy which is locally produced and which doesn't depend on the fluctuations in oil and coal supply. And we have to reinforce our industrial sovereignty by trying to diversify our supplies while being realistic when it comes to the ability of our industries to diversify. So we have to have an ambitious approach, but it has to be measured and progressive. So yes, there are structural dependencies. However, with a progressive approach and a harmonious approach amongst European countries, I think we can deliver projects within given deadlines, and that will help to consolidate our industrial value chain and to strengthen the French electric system. We have a question from Laurent. In terms of competition, do we have to fight on all fronts? Prices, for example. We don't want to forsake innovation in the name of independence in Europe. So do we have to fight on all fronts? No. I think that when there are calls for tenders, often there are lots of constraints and we are going to face competition. There are usually more than 10 pre-selected candidates. A lot of the grades when choosing the bidder refer to the actual price. Now, when it comes to the European framework and certain provisions in calls for tenders being gradually introduced to reinforce local presence, the value chain, and have segments of industry that are strengthened in Europe, well, these criteria will help to focus more on industrial sovereignty and the price of electricity. Well, how can we really shape this line of activity? We've talked a lot about pilot projects with offshore wind farms. We've just discussed it with one of the previous speakers, Daniel Monod. Do we have a sufficient base to build this French and European offshore wind farm strategy? Well, we've conducted a small-scale test, testing various floating turbine technologies. Eiffage Métal and other French companies have been involved. It's a very good basis. I think that everyone learned a great deal. Some things won't be done in the same way in the future, no doubt. So it's a good starting point. Is it sufficient? As I said earlier on, we have to create greater visibility for all the players so that they can develop new projects. We're lagging behind our initial schedules, and we need to move ahead following the general guidelines. Of course, we need to be able to attract big investment. We've gone through the first commercial stage. So far, there's never been a floating wind farm, a big offshore wind farm. It's actually been put together, financed, and so on. Everyone needs to play their rightful part, and we have to open up the horizon. There are all sorts of proposals following this bid from the state, and the industry will have to take its positions and be very present. Currently, we have to admit that some of the main turbine manufacturers in Europe are looking a bit elsewhere because it's a bit of a niche activity and the financial stakes are huge. There are other projects that are easier to do than offshore wind farms. So you have this volume notion in order to secure this industrial line of activity. Yes, in the calls for tenders, we have to take account of the new features of offshore wind farms. We shouldn't ask offshore to be exactly the same as more mature on-land projects. Everyone then has to play his or her rightful part. It's good to have 3 suppliers when you launch a call for tenders. If we don't have enough, then we'll probably have to call on suppliers from outside Europe, but hopefully with a base in Europe. Once again, it's good to build floating wind farms in Fos, but if you don't have a European turbine manufacturer, then you're in a bit of a bind. So it's a question of volume to secure this line of activity, and that hinges on calls for tenders. There has to be some certainty, in other words, for people to become fully engaged. I understand what Dominique was saying. It's absolutely necessary to provide greater visibility in terms of volume, because the players, the ports, will only engage if they have visibility as to the projects and sufficiently fast and stable production goals. We're almost the only people in Europe to launch into commercial offshore wind farms. All the developers are waiting for the latest framework, and we need to launch this call for tender because that will act as a real driving force. We need to have European companies and people in Europe who are competitive and who are really present. To that end, they have to be offered a stable market, as we were saying, visibility in terms of volume, a calendar, in terms of projects and deadlines and authorizations. It has to be a market that really creates an incentive. We need, therefore, to support the supply chain using things like loans, tax breaks, support for innovation, and all sorts of other things. The market also has to be favorable to the ramping up of skills. It's necessary to increase the attractiveness of these lines of activity and to have training courses which are suitable on offer. There's another point, port structures in the Mediterranean. The availability of these ports will provide good visibility as to flows and paces and the competitiveness of projects. So it's a question of ramping up, really. Yes, indeed. ADEME has invested heavily for several years now in all this. There's been a call for projects, and we're waiting eagerly the results. That will enable ports to validate projects, which will make it possible to welcome the manufacturing and assembly of the floating wind farms, etc. Just to refer to these wind turbines, again, what is the share of French and European industrial content? Has this been identified in the various batches, cables, floaters, anchors? Yes, we can quickly see how the industrial chain works in these projects. Let's start with the cables. Well, for the cables, we have European players like Nexans and others, and they've been working in this area forever. They provide all the requisite answers to our needs. It's very satisfactory. Now, the floaters, that's something new. Over and above the engineering component, the issue is the availability of the ports. And there, as I was saying, the ENMI and ADEME provides aid, and that's decisive if we are to succeed with these projects, because this aid, this support, will make it possible to locate construction sites for the floaters. If you have steel floaters, there will be an assembly. That hasn't created many jobs. It mobilizes a lot of skills for several years. If we have concrete floaters, then we can have the entire manufacturing located on site. Now, after making the floaters, you have to incorporate the actual wind turbine, and this will take place in the port too. And the turbines per se, that's where most is at stake, as Dominique was saying. There are several things at stake here. We've noted a reduction in the number of players on the offshore market in Europe. That's been the case for several years now. It's not very reassuring. There's a risk that we will lack capacity. We won't be able to produce the requisite volumes on time. And the other risk is that turbine manufacturers won't be sufficiently competitive. The turbine manufacturers are also lagging behind in terms of innovation in comparison with Asian manufacturers who are investing heavily and who are launching into more advanced technologies. In terms of size, in any event. And that creates a difference between European and Asian players. It will be reduced, this difference, through the reduction of new provisions, but Chinese competition is proceeding apace. We have European manufacturers who aren't massively present in the offshore segment because of the tariffs, basically. It's a bit disappointing. It's a bit troubling to see that we don't necessarily have the right answer today. There are other aspects as well which are very positive when it comes to development. And we have numerous very competitive companies in this area. We can work with all the local companies in terms of development. As complexity increases and as the industrial and financial situation becomes more complicated, then we reach out more to international companies which have the ability to respond to very precise requests and demands. So even if companies aren't always French, jobs will be created. There will be a local economic spin-off. We have to look at the actual segments where there's a strong value, the various links in the chains where France may have a real know-how and a competitive edge. I'm thinking, for example, about the floaters, assembly, port logistics, engineering. There, France really has the skills and the mastery of all of these areas. Conversely, if you ask a developer to become involved in the recycling of permanent magnets, for example, well, that's beyond the control of the developer, really. It's not the right approach. Thank you. I suggest we take a couple of questions now before going on to the third part. We'll be talking about the conditions for success. A first question from Mathieu. What is missing to develop a big offshore wind farm activity as big as on land? You've answered this question partially, but is there something specific, something special that's actually lacking? Well, I think we need references, we need pilot projects, so people can see how things really work. So one can be quite sure that these wind turbines work well. We have any number of pilot projects. There was one for 2 megawatts, about 80 wind turbines. And now we're talking about 1 or 2 gigawatts using the same technology. So on land, we need to develop projects bit by bit. It's a bit costly at the beginning. We've optimized a number of things already. Perhaps we need to help industry to invest as well, to build floaters, for example. We have a couple of players, but not that many, and perhaps they need to be given a helping hand. I'd also like to refer to the port side. We need ports, we need floaters. They take a lot of space. You have to be able to store them. If you don't have a port, you can't do the assembly, which creates a lot of value locally. A question to both of you. How can we find a solution with ocean winds? Do we have enough CAPEX and OPEX? And what about the commercial offering and tariffs? I can start. One cannot compare a pilot project and a commercial wind farm. A pilot farm was designed to test a technology. So we're talking about technologies that existed only on paper. The idea was to create an industrial activity that didn't exist. We insisted a lot on the logistics, the ports, the transfer of floaters, and assembly. Contrary to fixed wind farms, this assembly takes place in the port and not at sea. So the logistics are totally different. Even if the costs are very high with these pilot farms, we're quite confident that we should be able to work along lines closer to land-based wind farms. And there we have fully mastered the process, the time frame for construction, for example, and our industrial partners have very specific specifications and contractual obligations which are very clear. So we're very confident. We're moving towards a commercial market, and these farms won't be as costly as the pilot ones. Dominica, I agree with what has just been said. The difference is that with these pilot farms, industrial partners that were selected learned a great deal. We were a bit captive. We have to be quite frank. Here we're talking about commercial projects with subcontractors who haven't yet been chosen. They will be chosen at a given point in time compared with competition. And we hope we'll be able to lower prices. There is a difference. And we won't have to pay for the linking to the grid, like in the pilot project. And if you buy 3 wind turbines, there's no scale effect. But if you buy many more, there is. It's better to buy 15 or more than just 3. Benoit, yeah, question from Jérôme. How do you assess the competitiveness of concrete as opposed to steel floaters? Well, it's true that these are 2 totally different industrial ventures. I think that both can be very competitive. For concrete, manufacturing will be very close to the site. One depends less, therefore, on economic ups and downs, internationally speaking. But basically, there are a number of risks when manufacturing concrete floaters, but at least they're made very close to the project. When it comes to steel floaters, the components are built in various different places, quite far from the site probably, and perhaps even in Asia in certain cases. These components will then be assembled in France. With welding, etc. There's a lack of skilled labor, for example. When it comes to competitiveness, however, the competitiveness can be very good. We'll just have to see what happens. We'll have to see what industry comes up with. Jean-Pierre is saying, can we really talk about sovereignty when a substantial part of the components, steel floaters, for example, and others, well, we're talking about steel and production, and ArcelorMittal may close down in France, for example. So what about production in the country? It's a real issue when we talk about industrial sovereignty, the energy transition, and geopolitics. It's what we were saying earlier on. We have to be able to produce ourselves and not depend on others. Of course, the steel industry has developed hugely in China over the past years, and there's a global steel market. When there's too much steel, it makes it difficult for sites that have high costs. But we still have to retain this ability to produce steel ourselves. What is special is that lots of people know how to make steel. A lot of steel is made in China. That steel was basically designed for China, however, so we have to retain our ability to produce in France. I don't believe that's the biggest challenge. It's mainly the magnets. If China decides to stop exporting magnets, then we're really in a bind. There's a question on magnets here. Can we find local solutions for magnets? Well, there are quite a lot of initiatives being taken in France when it comes to recycling magnets. We have Solvay and other players in Grenoble, a third one I can't remember the name, but we are working on recycling, and we're trying to initiate this ability to make magnets. The idea is to diversify supplies, not depend on just one country, China. I think we have to work on both scores at the same time. You can't create a new chain in just a year or two, but I believe that Europe is now aware of the situation and will try to increase its independence in this area. That brings us to the third part. We'll talk about the conditions for success. We've seen that the idea is to achieve industrial sovereignty, but at competitive prices. So basically, Dominique, can we reconcile these two goals, or will we have to make a clear political choice when it comes to acceptable prices?
I believe that if we reduce the offer only to France or Europe, we'll have less competition. So maybe we'll have an increase of the cost, particularly if that creates any tensions. So it's going to be a very political choice to decide what we're ready to pay to close up the European market to other actors and keep our sovereignty. So it's really a fine balance that has to be found here. But to get back to what I said at the beginning, we can find in the competition with the rest of the world a way of accelerating our way to keep our costs down without destroying all industries. I think we can combine both. In my opinion, we should rather not close up, but not to be naive and keep protecting ourselves, which is what's being done with the European regulation, particularly the NZAIA. The one thing they would like, but the European Commission is not favorable to it, is what is done in the UK. There's a form of bonus if you produce locally. So if you manage to source yourself locally, you get a bonus. So that encourages people to work locally. But the European Commission is not for it. So we have criteria such as obligations, for example, but the actors have to be here because on magnets, we're not going to start building a plant from the get-go tomorrow. It needs a bit of time for them to build those plants. So I think the bonus is quite efficient, would be efficient, but it's not going for now. So Benoit, you already saw some timelines for the tenders and how it's timed. Are we in an impasse? What is the tipping point in your view? We have the presidential French election in 2027. We feel like everything is stuck until then, and some even wonder, so it's going to stay like this until the election. But everything is at play right now. So yes, everything is should happen now because it's a niche market, the offshore wind parks. So we really need to have the AO9 and AO10 to begin, so the ports say enough visibility to have enough visibility to invest. Otherwise, we're going to miss that ramping up that is absolutely necessary, and we'll miss also out on the scale effects, and France will not be the European leader on the segment. Beyond volumes, we need to work on deadlines of development. The procedures remain too long today. We have all our partners of the sector who are waiting, have been waiting for 5 years, 8 years to see the projects being built and commissioned, and it's too long. We really need to accelerate the pace of development of these projects to give them more visibility and more certainty as well. Recently, we've been in a phase that is a bit tricky because it's hard to make decisions because we don't have enough public signals. We see cost cuttings with some developers. We see some people dropping off of tenders. So we really need to reassure the sector and confirm the planning and the projects that are in the pipeline today, because we're really walking on a tightrope here. Do you want to say a word on the topic, Dominique? No, I want to get back to two references that are interesting in France. It's Relix, that makes some orientation cones in the Vendée region. That's a really particular know-how that is based in France. It could be they're a world leader on that, and we have a similar approach of specialization. And I think that's what we should be looking for with ACLB, which is in Béziers, and they're opening up a line to manufacture parts that would be competitive. So I think it's a very good approach. There are a lot of things to be done. It's less visible than the large plants that we have in Le Havre or Saint-Nazaire for bigger components, but there's a lot of value to be reached in those little places, in those little projects. Lots of questions for the two of you. I'm going to try to give you a few of them because we want to save up some time to talk about training and job creation at the end of this roundtable, because we're going to need to do that. So, Petro Nottinger, we're going to talk to you. You're a director of the IS. It's Electronic and System Department at the University of Montpellier. You are a teacher, a researcher. You follow this exchange. A lot has been said. We understand the challenge of reindustrialization. You're working at it as well with your teams. What new needs have you identified? New needs in terms of skills do you see for the offshore wind parks, and how does the university try to progress on that topic? First of all, thank you in the name of our president, Philippe Augier, to have invited the university to this debate. There are new needs, of course, that have been identified throughout surveys, polls done with the industrials, and that actually helped building some training programs like MECEN that was mentioned by our vice president early on. In terms of new jobs, there are probably a few, but I would like to say first that the needs, as they were mentioned by my colleagues, the need in skills is throughout the whole value chain, because we talk about jobs which are hard to find on the market: cauldronry, welding, electricity, technicians for maintenance, design engineer, electrical engineers, etc. So those are jobs that are already difficult to find, and we need to have more people trained for that. In terms of new jobs, we identified a few: data scientists. Some jobs are linked to cables, and maybe other jobs created even more recently, but that started like a drone pilot, piloting robots. And there are also some other jobs that must be qualified, like on offshore wind. We work on this. When I say we, is all the actors of the training and research departments, which is really what we want to instill in our engineers, to give them the necessary tools for the offshore wind parks. I'm talking in terms of technical skills, but also skills that are linked to the environment and managing environmental impact. So how do we prepare for this? Well, first of all, something that is very important is to increase the resources in the training linked to these jobs, hard to fill. Second, because those actions have to be done together, of course, to give a special color to the training programs with specific modules dedicated to offshore wind, and also training for jobs that are transforming as we speak. We have a very particular region. We have a special diploma on wind parks. And now we also have another one on maintenance of energy, marine energy. We have a lot of schools in our greater region, the University of Perpignan, Marseille, Toulouse, which will give this particular flavor to their training to wind, offshore wind. So these are all the challenges of research and development. We are committed in this direction. We work on topics that are linked to offshore wind. To give you a few examples, there have been some research being done. We talked about cables. There's research being done on that. Also the issue of surveillance monitoring, maintenance, which is very costly. So in terms of research, there are multidisciplinary topics that we're working on. So we have this synergy between research and development, training, and collaboration with the industry, because we participate to the working group steered by the region. The president talked about WindDoc. We also have working groups on dedicated to R&D at the regional and Mediterranean level. We collaborate very intensely with some actors of the industry throughout competitivity hubs. And also there are all the actions which are done with the industrial on the wind offshore wind. So one of the challenges is the attractiveness. How do you attract the young ones to this emerging sector? Are you working on it actively? Yes, it's a big topic. When we talk about technical training programs, we all know that the high school students and even the university students are less and less attracted by technical jobs. So offshore wind energy is part of those jobs that are. We need skills there, clearly. And so we're in the process of developing with all the actors of the training in the Mediterranean some continuous actions with the implementation of the open doors, trade fairs, conferences on the subject. What we really wish is to create what we call some platforms of activity and training. We also want to create digital resources. The young ones like that. So, and of course, some other actions. All of it to inform and guide and prepare our future technicians and engineers. So I'd like to go back to the way we're going to structure this training programs, starting already with the MECEN project, which is the biggest training program for offshore wind in France, and that integrates a lot of actors of the sector. The challenges are very important. We talked about research and development, but we also need to remember that the needs start 3 years before the baccalaureate. So we really want to, with all my colleagues, to build a whole sector of training from 3 years before the baccalaureate and up until afterwards. For those of you who don't know MECEN, the project, it involves about 30 actors. The budget is 7 million euros. So what is it exactly? What are the goals? What is their ambition? The MECEN project is a project that was created by about 30 actors, and the project managers are University of Montpellier. It's the main project manager with the École Centrale Méditerranée, and it was a way to answer to the request made by the investment plan of France. And it was selected this year in September, and that integrates all of the actors that are involved by training programs on offshore wind. The 30 partners, among those you have the academia, of course. I'm trying not to forget anyone. My colleagues, so Université de Montpellier, École Centrale de Méditerranée, INSA from Toulouse, Université de Perpignan, SUP UNR, there's the University of Tarbes, and I think that's and the Aix-Marseille University as well. We also have some métier campuses for training. We have the campus EREC in Nîmes on renewables and eco-construction. We have the campus of Marseille as well, and we have high schools in terms of training and professional training, and we have associations as well that involve several economic actors. We talked about Windoc, Semater, SINAV. There are many others, and of course some industrials. EDF renewables, Ocean Winds, of course. CARE is part of the major actors of the assembly part. So all these people have the same goal. It's to structure this network and to put in place new training programs, increase the number of talents, and pool all their resources. Thank you very much. Do you want to react to this topic, which is a very important topic, job creation and training? Yes, we completely support the MECEN project. We think it's a very good approach to structure and regroup all the trainings around all these needs of jobs. It's not easy because it's always hard to have a global vision and not everybody working in silos. And we try to provide information on our needs, on what is development and construction and maintenance of those parks to make sure that people really harness it. Benoit, do you have a word of conclusion? And we're going to keep going on the industry from the European point of view. I can already confirm what Dominique was saying on training. We're fully committed and happy with the EDF group to contribute to the MECEN project. We made our commitments in the tender, in the public tender for training. We committed to do 80,000 hours of training, so we really need to get some support and programs, training programs that are adapted to that. But to conclude, what I can say is that we're mobilized on those issues. The developers, particularly us, EDF, with this project, we're completely committed in this approach to work locally, and we'll do our very best by integrating some parameters in our tenders to make sure that we have a choice that takes into account this dimension to put the region first. Thank you. We can give them all a round of applause. Pedro Nottinger, Benoît Chenu, and Dominique Monod. We invite you to stay here, stay with us. We're going to welcome in less than 2 minutes the speakers of the second session. We're still going to talk about industrialization of offshore wind, and we will be really taking stock of other European actors and what they think. Thank you very much.